All right, so I'm going to jump in and start. So this is the Mobility Ad Hoc Committee to talk about that aspect of the draft strategic plan. And in a second, because I failed to do this last time, we'll have staff introduce themselves. Mariah, we've already gone through sort of this preamble with the first group on growth and development, so I'm going to mainly speak to you because these two have already heard it.
Okay.
Staff will, at some point in the agenda, be able to share with you sort of how they have worked to frame up the elements under mobility. Our goal tonight is not to enlarge the plan, but streamline it. So we want to try to get focus on what is important to council. And when I say to council, I mean because you have listened to community, because you have had experiences as a council member, and you want to help us have the finger on the pulse on what the community wants on mobility. So to that end, we are going to have a little exercise where we ask for your elevator speech on what you would tell a community member we're focused on under that umbrella of mobility. We're going to use that in part to shape up the criteria that we want to apply to everything that we have drafted thus far. We also have a set of consistent criteria across every goal area. Sounds more like, are the measures and actions measurable, attainable, things like that. But we're really looking for tonight is for you to identify what sort of outcomes you're looking for from mobility. That's going to help us shape up that specific topical criteria. At the end of the night, I'm hoping that we arrive at a place where we have some consensus around what we want this part of the strategic plan to sound like, and that all of you will be able to go back to your colleagues at the work session in February and talk about your conversation here and share where you landed and what you're recommending live on in the plan. David, what did I miss?
I think you did pretty good.
Okay. All right. So with that, Stephen, you want to kick off and just introduce yourself?
Sure.
Yeah.
My name is Steve Padua. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner for Public Works Engineering.
I'm Bennett Ashbaugh. I'm the Public Works Operations Manager for Streets.
Great. Thanks. Two members of our staff mobility team, and Jen is back there, but Jen is a member of how many of these teams? Three teams. So she also has participated in this one from Parks and Rec.
Yeah, Bennett.
Excellent. Thank you both. All right. I think we're ready.
I'm Brian Scott with BDS Planning. Y'all know me. Dan Lokic, also with BDS. Gabriel sends his regrets. He's facilitating a meeting in Tacoma this afternoon. So our agenda is to quickly review sort of the purpose of the meeting. Emily already touched on that. And then we want to spend a chunk of time exploring the council members' intent about this goal on mobility. And so we're going to spend some time with that and kind of give you a chance to say how you'd explain it to a constituent and see how the three of those thoughts fit together. And then we want, hopefully we'll have some understanding of that, and then we want to dive into the objectives and consider the actions. There's quite a few objectives outlined under this one. There are 5. So hopefully we can review what the staff was thinking in terms of those objectives, and then we will hopefully prioritize those so we can understand which of these objectives are most important to council members based on the criteria that we discussed at your last meeting about aligning with the strategic intent with possibility of success, timeline, etc. And then if we have time, we didn't get anywhere close in the last session, but if we have time, it'd be great if we could get to reviewing the performance measures and talking about that today. So if that makes sense. And then switch to the other. So meeting outcomes, desired outcomes for the meeting, learn about guidelines for strategic planning. I'll touch on those shortly. Performance measures and actions, clarify council's intent behind the goals, the elevator pitch, emphasizing the objectives based on our criteria, learn about and verify the actions, and refine performance measures if we get there. So what is strategic planning? I've been through this before, but I want to touch on it, just put this in context. It's a deliberate, disciplined effort to produce fundamental decisions and actions that shape and guide what an organization does and why it does it. And it's a process by which the organization envisions the future, develop goals, objectives, and actions to achieve that future. It's a time to step back away from the day-to-day activity of the organization, the annual work planning, and think bigger picture, longer term, and think about where you want to actually change the direction that you're going, and think about those things that need strategic, longer term attention. Why do strategic planning? To clarify goals and direction, address significant strategic problems, or take advantage of opportunities, to set priorities that inform decision making, especially budgeting. So that helps staff as they're preparing budgets for your review to think about understanding your strategic intent, increasing accountability, and improving performance. What strategic planning is not, this can get confusing, not a way to predict the future. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow or next year. You can't. It's not a substitute for the judgment of leadership. One of the strategic plan won't make the hard decision for you 6 months from now, but it'll help your understanding of how to make that decision. It's not smooth, predictable, and linear as much as we would like it to be. It never is. It's also not a comprehensive operational or performance measurement program for everything the city does. Strategic plan is about how are you strategically changing direction, doing more of something, doing less of something, doing the same of something despite pressure to change. So it's things that are going well may not even appear in the strategic plan or be de-emphasized. The goals that the staff, department heads, and council leadership set at the very beginning of this process was for the our Issaquah process was vision and strategy alignment, getting the staff and the council in alignment about what the priorities are, interdepartmental coordination, engaging diverse community voices and community-driven priorities. And that went really well in the process, and we have a lot of information about the community's priorities. And you wanted an actionable plan with priorities that was realistic about capacity. It was assignability, that it was clear who was doing what and what got assigned to whom. That the plan will drive budget and capital improvement decisions. It has some metrics and monitoring, and it's also a communication tool. So driving us into this first key agenda item is council intent. So this is the group, the ad hoc committee on mobility. And what we'd love to know is sort of what are we trying to achieve? In the council work sessions before, we identified the mobility goal as getting around town is easier for people who live, work, and play here. And I want to think about you go to the grocery store and your constituent saw was reading the city's newsletter, since we determined there's not a newspaper, was looking at the city's website and saw there's this mobility goal, and this constituent says, what were you thinking? What is the city trying to accomplish? And what the staff would love to hear is you all, how you want to answer that? What is it you think you're trying to achieve with this mobility goal? How are you going to explain it to a constituent so we can help understand how to make sure that the objectives and actions are relating to your intent? So I will take some notes about each of your thoughts on that spiel about mobility, and then we'll see how they compare and discuss it. Who'd love to wade in and explain what you were thinking about this mobility thing? Last time.
don't know if I have this completely thought out, but I think that when I think about an elevator pitch, I think what we are intending, that it's easier to get around town for people to live, work, and play here. I often talk about being able to get from point A to point B, and that can be in a variety. That can either be in your car. It's usually in your car that I'm talking with the community about, but it can also be biking, walking, and so paying attention to all of that. But I think that funding is probably the first highlight that I would talk about, that we're working to have funding that for both projects that are short-term and long-term. What are some projects that we could work on right away that would have impact? And then oftentimes I try to give examples. The example I would probably talk about is the roundabout at Trader Joe's. And then what are the longer-term capital projects that we're looking to work on, and then like to give an example of that. So to give an example for right now, I would probably talk about the I-90 interchange work and justification work that we've been talking about. And then the second point that I would talk about in an elevator speech would be talking about regional pass-through traffic and working on local efforts that would have impact. And then the last would be a vision for the future, and the example that I would give there would be having planning and getting out in front of where we would want to place the light rail station.
Wow, that was a lot in a short elevator ride.
Well, I think that what I try to do if I'm talking with the community is kind of hit 3 bullet points and then just give a quick example, because I think that even the bullet points sometimes are just, it's a lot of like, well, what exactly are we working on? And so trying to give some examples, but what I would hope that I would come away with is a much more succinct elevator pitch, and once we have those goals, then those examples can be, this is what we're focusing on.
So the 3 points were getting from A to B, funding, and long-term?
Yeah.
That's going to be a mess if I pick that up. Okay. Stacy?
Sure. What, as you heard me in the last session, my elevator speech to people initially, if they ask about the goal and a goal in the strategic plan, is, we're going to work on what you told us you wanted us to work on. And for this goal, I think that this isn't really an elevator speech so much as it is telling you that I was saying that I think the intent here is pretty accurate, based on what we've heard from folks, which they would like to get around town easier, whether you live, work, or play here. And so I would tell people in that elevator speech specifically what we are going to be working on for the next 5 years to meet the intent, which is what they told us in order to show that we are working on what they told us that they wanted us to work on, and how those projects meet that intent.
Yeah, I have more of a statement to make rather than the intent. This is the word easier is a struggle for me, because I think I have to look at the different modes, and there are things that we can do to make things better and easier, and there are some things we can't make easier. So I think the intent is, let's talk about rush hour traffic. I think one of this intent is to make those that must travel at high congestion times is to make those travel times more predictable and less, disruptive to their personal lives. Example would be, and boy, I heard this in spades about, especially if you're in the South, this is part of town that if I have to travel down Front Street or Newport Way and get to someplace on South Front Street, and it's hard, and that has a big impact on people's lives. So to me, and the thing is, it's also unpredictable. One day it could be so long, and another day it could be a lot longer, and that's what's very, very difficult. I don't want to. I think it would be a mistake for us to have an intent that we're actually going to make that easier, because that implies that a lot of things are going to go away in the next few years. A lot of cars are going to be gone. So that's my caveat on that use of the word easier, especially in those very specific circumstances. And I would say that as my primary intent. I think the biggest pain and the most interest in the community is that, during the congestion hours, especially in the PM, our intent is to smooth out those bumps, find a way to make that trip of yours to get home more predictable and less of an impact on your personal life. That's the number. To me, there's other objectives, but that's my number one intent.
So getting from A to B, getting the funding short and long-term right, long-term impacts, predictable travel times, getting around easier, that we're doing what you want us to do. That seems like all that could be true at the same time. I'm not hearing like disagreement. It's okay to not disagree. I just want to clarify it. But if any of you heard like, no, I'm not sure that's right, then this would be the time to talk about it.
That we all agree on those bubbles? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, as I listened, I didn't hear like, Stacy wants to go left and Paul wants to go right.
So, just for clarity, I'm not sure that I got this the last time and I didn't ask. What's the specific purpose for the bubbles up here? Going through our elevator speech, how are we going to use those?
Not planning to use it.
Okay.
Trying to make sure the staff understands what the council's thinking.
Okay.
In terms of these goals. And my quick in-progress observation was this was painfully hard in the growth and development conversation, and we ended up actually having to rewrite it several times to try and get something that you all could live with. And I'm, at least at this moment, it's seeming like maybe not as hard here, but maybe harder to do this, but.
So my only comment on your bubbles, and I don't know when you wrote getting around easier down. My point is, for some modes, and yes, that was my intent. And there's another key mode that I was talking about is I don't think making it easier is the way I would want to characterize the intent. That's what I said, kind of more predictable.
More predictable. Okay, that's a fair point. Yeah. I'm going to suppose you have anything against easier, but more predictable might be a more honest answer.
Well, exactly.
So I'll push back a little bit on that. I think easier is a word that is measurable. If you use that word, you can do things that are measurable under that word. But I'm not sure that, and I agree that part of what we want to do is make certain travel more predictable. But there's certain travel that I'm not sure describing it as you want it to be more predictable is a good descriptor. So if we want better trail connections, if we want more sidewalk connections, I think that makes it easier for people to get around. I think both words are good. I don't know that one is better than the other.
So if I'm just filling in the blanks here, we want to make it easier to get around using all kinds of different modes. And a key pain point in Issaquah is getting around in a car at congested times, and we'd like to make that more predictable.
Maybe an additional qualifier is warranted as well. So I agree with that statement. And because I don't want it to be implied, okay, so we'll just make it 2 hours every day all the time for you. Well, no, that's not what I meant. So, and I'm not sure what the other qualifier is, but
No, I would agree with that the last categorization of that. I think that we would like to make it easier and focus on that, and then the predictability part. I can really see what you're both saying. I think it is a word that we can use that would give everybody a clear picture. Because if we all hear we're going to make it easier, and that may not get us where we need to go. But I like easier with the mini modes. That's a good classification there.
I sort of hear that there's kind of this making it easier with lots of different ways, and then recognizing that at peak times you want it to be predictable and acceptable. That is, it wants to be not any harder than it has to be. Predictable at 12 hours is not okay, but we also may not be able to get you to be able to go through town at 50 miles an hour at 5:50. That just may not be realistic.
Well, it's predictable now. It just takes forever. You can predict that.
You could look at it that way, right?
I'm just teasing. I'm just.
Right. So,
No, but
it feels to me like there's a lot of
Yeah.
clarity, and kind of that's the gist, is those sort of two parts of it. Emily, David, does that
wonder if you
seem
could-
pretty clear?
I wonder if you could say improved predictability. I don't know. That's kind of a strange way to think about it, but I'm trying to speak to what I think that you were getting at with the word predictable.
Again, we're not trying to publish something here. We're
Yeah.
just sort of trying to sort out intent. This seems, as I said, it may be harder to do than some of the other ones, but your intent seems pretty clear to me.
I agree. The intent is clear, and where that will help us, we can refine it, define it a little bit better as we then identify actions and performance measures, I think.
All
Make
right.
sure that we're still on track with where you want to go.
I would suggest we move forward into objectives and actions. I think.
Let's do it.
So, moving into objectives and actions, I want to do a little brief primer on what we think good objectives and actions are in general in a strategic plan. And then you can have that in your head, as well as the conversation we just had, as you get a presentation from staff in just a moment about what they were thinking in terms of the objectives and actions. So when we work with lots of different communities on strategic planning, which we do with municipal governments as well as sizable nonprofits and other public agencies, we think that good objectives are, they specify outcomes, and they seek to, and they're clarified what you're trying to create and for who you're trying to create it. They link in a compelling way to your goals, mission, and vision. That is, they're strategic. They afford sufficient control over the outcomes to enable accountability, because you've been specific about what you're trying to accomplish, so you can tell if you're getting there. And to that point, a good objective is realistic and achievable given your capabilities and the limited time frame that you have. It's measurable on an accurate and timely basis, and it'll enable you to make strategic trade-offs going forward, especially related to program focus and resource allocation. So we talk about SMART objectives, which are strategic, measurable, realistic, achievable, and time limited, sort of kind of the elements to those things.
That last bullet, strategic trade-offs, I've been thinking about that. I've heard you say twice tonight already that there might be something that's kind of going okay and you don't address it in there. You don't address it in your strategic plan. I think you've alluded to some, you've made that
It
comment.
is pretty common in my experience with municipal strategic planning that the public safety activities of the city government are adequately resourced and the community is proud of them and the council is unlikely to disrupt those. And so they almost don't need to get mentioned in the strategic plan even though they use up 60% of the general fund.
Okay, so that's a great example. So what do you mean by then the trade-offs?
Well, and I mean, it seems to me as you're thinking as things go forward, you are testing different things against each other going forward, and fair point that if you don't say that those other things are important, maybe they're implicit that they're not.
Right, and that, I mean, it's an extreme example, but it's like, wow, here's our strategic plan. But we didn't even talk about public safety in here, so we can trade all kinds of things off there. It's apparently not important. But that clearly isn't the intent. So what is it you mean by the trade-offs? Is this the priority the ranking we're going to do?
The way it's being used really well in some other cities that we've had a relationship with or others that we've learned from is when the new idea comes forward because a council member saw something that happened in another community and they wanted to get one of those in their town, or some citizen came up with this bright idea.
Something new comes in.
The council has an annual work plan based on the strategic plan, and when somebody says, we want to fund the bocce ball court, then if it's working, somebody else on the council says, well, hey, that's a cool idea, but what is it we're going to take off of this other list to fund that? And it sort of forces some strategic priority setting and say, there are things that will come up that you didn't see coming that may become strategically more important than something that you did in strategic planning, but you need to sort of force that trade-off.
Okay, and that then requires a lot of discipline on how new ideas then are actually brought forward and discussed. We can't forget the strategic plan when somebody brings up the bocce ball court.
Yeah, I'm so itching to show this off because we just did this last night in Salem. But we did this thing, we were doing, last year, the city of Salem did their strategic plan. They created a policy agenda. And then last year, they created a set of things that were on their agenda that were going forward, and this was their thing to the community. And then we were just last night at a session to do the new annual policy agenda. And some of these things, well, most of these things aren't finished, so they're still on the list. And then there were a bunch of new ideas, and we just went through a session where the council listed 16, or they listed like 12 or 13 things that they thought ought to be on the new agenda. And then there were 3 or 4 things that came up for other reasons that got there. And we just went through this exercise last night of where they had to take each one of them. And in the context of how much time did the council have at council meetings in 2019 for work sessions, did they want to have a work session on this item and actually spend council time on it? Or did they want to defer it to the manager to think about whether or not it could fit into the budget in a tight budget cycle? Did they want to defer it to a future year? Did they want to forget about it? And it was really a great exercise in sort of sorting out what were they really serious about, or what were they going to delegate to staff. And it's a similar thing of being able to take, take items that are there and say, just make you weigh them against each other. Right? Does that help?
Yeah, we now have a framework in which to assess, on a regular basis, including new proposals and perhaps changing priorities.
Yeah, and it gets you away from, there's this plan this work plan that is just a combination of everything everybody thought of, and it's all kind of stacked up on top of each other, but it's forcing trade-offs between those things. And then moving into action statements, we think a good action statement, and this is the direction we gave to city staff as they were preparing the stuff you're looking at now. It represents a critical step toward achieving the objective. It's specific about what will be occurring, realistic and achievable, given your capabilities and limited time frames, measurable on an accurate and timely basis, and it uses clear, understandable language that a general audience can understand. We also think especially at the level where the council's looking at them, there shouldn't be all that many actions. They should be big, bold things that have a lot of smaller steps that managers are working on doing them, but no more than 1 to 3 per objective, so you're not kind of way down in the weeds of the city's day-to-day business, but you're kind of keeping that strategic intent. So that was the guidance we gave to staff as thinking about drafting these goals and objectives. Some things to keep in mind is they need to fit within the current context of things that are going on with the city, the sort of the timing, the budget, other things like that. They will be updated on an annual cycle as performance, community input, and context changes, just like that example I just gave you. They're not going to cover everything the city's working on. They may require, and they should require, significant interdepartmental collaboration, because stuff that's at council level probably should be things that involve several departments. And they need to be financially and politically feasible. So with that, I want to turn it over to staff to give you an update on what they were thinking about these goals and objectives.
Good evening. We put together a little presentation. So go through that. All right. I'm Bennett Ashbaugh, PWO. I'm the team lead for mobility. We spent a lot of time on this, as all the other groups have and as you have. And I'm going to go through kind of our thought process and how we got. So mobility. We talked about the goal. Getting around town is easier for people who live, work, and play here. We came up with this in one of our first sessions, and it's just stuck. It really is the ultimate goal for us in our group and how we see the intent of this part of the strategic plan. So the team itself, we have multiple departments represented. There's a lot of us, interdepartmental work, as he just stated, and we get together a lot. So. Performance measures. So how do we achieve the goal? How do we know we are succeeding? When we first sat down, we had a brain dump of ideas, and we had a lot of different ideas and different oh-mans going on when we thought about it. So we thought about regional growth and the explosion of that, local population growth, safety for all the different modes to be represented. And obviously the traffic congestion is a big deal. I live south of town. I can use 13 minutes to work and about 45 home, so very aware of that. And the fact that we have limited funding options. The Master Mobility Plan is upcoming. It was already on the books to be created, so this is helping shape that. And the idea of future transit, future light rail. Heard from the community. It's something that gets brought up in the community when we're out there. It's something that we felt needed to be addressed. And then we really looked at the fact that we have a very large TIP, a lot of projects, a lot of plans, and we felt we needed to break up the near-term funding versus the long-term funding. We really had two different things that we wanted to address, right? Long-term, long time of funding, different funding options, different feasibility to get those projects under construction and design. Near term, smaller projects with big impacts, and those are the projects we can do while we are planning for the other things. So we wanted to have some action at the same time that we're going through all of these different planning exercises and trying to figure out how we're going to move forward. So those are what we thought about. Performance measures, we can dive into these more in questions after, but basically mode share split, share of travel by type, system connectivity, percentage of completed identified bike, pedestrian, and vehicle network gaps. So where sidewalks end and then pick up 200 feet later and leave the pedestrian stranded. Same with bike lanes, kicking them back into the street. They just happen to end. And identifying those and fixing them. System access, percentage of housing units within a quarter mile of a transit service, percentage of housing units within a quarter mile of a regional non-motorized network. And then the community satisfaction, a rating of the overall ease of getting to the places you usually have to visit in Issaquah. Just kind of a feel of the community, seeing how they perceive things are going. So those are our 4 performance measures. So then when we sat down, we started thinking about, okay, we need funding. No matter what, we need to figure out a way to use what we have and a way for us to think about future funding and how we're going to get more funding for the larger projects that will ultimately really benefit the mobility system. And we need guidelines. The Master Mobility Plan, we need guidelines to help design those things. We need action in the meantime. And then the light rail integration, and then partnerships to try to handle regional traffic. We can only do so much without the partnerships of the people we're connected to, right? The communities we're connected to. So from there, we outlined it all, and we came up with objectives. And the objectives kind of morph. So objective 1, sustainable funding strategy is in place to plan, build, and maintain a connected mobility system. So we want to identify funding options and feasibility. We want an action plan for near-term, small money, big impact projects, whether it's programmatic or structures in the roadway, identifying those gaps. And then we need to also keep in mind and develop and implement funding strategies for long-term capital projects. And then we also need to communicate with the public and have a communication strategy specifically focused on transportation and the mobility master plan. So that is where we landed with objective 1. Objective 2 is essentially the master mobility plan adoption and implementation. This is going to help shape us moving forward. And it'll also, after a time, we'll have an annual mobility report card, which Stephen can speak more on. Objective 3, so this is our action item. There are improved connections and efficiencies in the mobility system. We had a few more actions. We condensed them into one. So we need to take an inventory, we need to assess that inventory, we need to prioritize what we think are the most important areas, and then we need to implement long-term improvements, trying to use the currently budgeted dollar that we have already in our different departments and in our budget. So these are smaller projects, again, to help the mobility system that we would expect to be implemented like yearly. As soon as this is implemented, we have something on the ground that year. Objective 4 is the light rail. Preferred location and vision. The light rail in Issaquah is established. Action items: develop a citywide transit plan. Engage stakeholders for the preferred location and integration. And update city plans for that integration. Objective 5. This is the objective that we're trying to minimize the negative impacts of regional traffic. And this deals with the programs and partnerships are developed and expanded. Basically, we need to really dive into the regional traffic behavior. We need to facilitate, define pass-through traffic policy objectives. Through the mobility master plan, we need to identify corridor travel priorities, and we need to explore partnerships with transit agencies and neighboring jurisdictions for new options, demand management, and other innovative mobility options. So you can sense there is a lot of partnerships we need to foster, and we have some existing, and we need to foster those, and we also need to pursue those much better. So that is kind of where we are at.
Can you put the slide back up that has all the objectives up on it?
Yeah, don't get sick. This one?
Yeah. It's easier to kind of visualize the whole thing. So reactions to that overview of the goal, objectives, and actions.
It's a lot of planning, and the the plan is for 5 years, and so the goal really should be getting around town is easier for people who live, work, and play here in 5 years. So I don't disagree that we need to, funding strategy, and I know, the mobility master plan. I would like to see more projects on the ground within 5 years. The light rail integration, I'm not sure that belongs in the strategic plan. That doesn't help us do anything in 5 years. In terms of getting around town easier. I think it's a planning necessity for the long-range plan. I would think that would be just a work plan item, just something that happens. That's my reaction. I mean, I don't disagree with what's up there. I'd like to see more stuff on the ground. Not sure light rail integration needs to be actually in the strategic plan.
Do you want staff response now, or
Yeah.
let them all speak first?
Why don't we have council speak first, and then we
Okay.
I would agree that as I'm looking through and we're thinking about what are areas where we could narrow down, what are some things that we want to prioritize, I think projects. So when I was talking about the elevator speech and giving specific examples, the reason I brought up those specific examples as part of the elevator speech is when I'm out in the community or talking with people in Issaquah or friends, they don't. If it's a planning thing, they're like, okay, what's the project that you're working on? And so I really want things to be able to boil down to what are some projects that we could be working on. And I like that we are talking about I was looking at some of the smaller capital projects that could be done now. As far as the light rail integration, this is something I feel incredibly strongly about. I really think we have to get out in front of that and do the planning. Where that is, whether that's, I guess if it were outside of the strategic plan and we knew that it was something that was going to be worked on no matter what, I would be okay with that. So, it maybe it doesn't have to muddy the waters, but I would want to make sure that we're doing that. I think we have to get out in front of that and do the planning. But to Stacy's point, I hadn't thought about it that way. Maybe that's just something we should be doing anyway.
If I recall correctly in the presentation, objective number 3, which you call action, it seemed like you mentioned the CIP. I think that's where you mentioned it, right? And you said we have a big one, and you talked specifically about bike lanes and sidewalks. And could you give us? I mean, is this tied to the first one in funding? Because the magnitude of making a difference in 5 years is going to largely be measured by what happens right in there. So how big is that?
The action, objective 3?
Yeah, or is it to be determined because we have to decide what funding we have?
I would say they're tied together, particularly with the action item where we talk about the near-term budgeting and prioritization.
Did you look at projects? Did you look at the CIP and say, boy, we need to do these, need to get done? Did you get that far?
We have done that. We have a different group together, the transportation mobility team, and we looked at that often. We have recently started a list on low-hanging fruit projects, we call them. So projects that are less expensive but impactful, like removing bulldozers, allowing left turns for local residents, adding the bike lanes, fixing the gaps. And the goal would be to use existing funding for that, and also be looking at sustainable funding options to continue.
So I have another follow-up question for this one. You just rattled off a couple sound simple kind of things. Give me a sense of how well those opportunities already are known, or is there an identified kind of list?
We do have a list of projects that we have identified.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. I think this is very, very key. I mean, you talk about making a difference. You've heard already tonight,
Sure.
Others quite a bit, and they really do. From flashing yellow arrows to a roundabout where there wasn't something before, have a big impact on people and their perception that we're getting. Well, that they have an impact. They're positive.
Yeah.
They really can. So if there's okay. So thank you for that. The objective number 3 has some real concrete objectives behind it. We have the question about funding. There's always prioritization. Okay. I'm actually concerned a little bit about objective number 1 because, so how do I say this? Let me walk that back.
Okay.
We have to do number 1, and I didn't need a strategic plan to tell me that. So, but it's okay that it's in the strategic plan. Fine. So, okay, I've kind of come full circle there, and I kind of feel the same way about the light rail as well. I think it would be a heckin' of accomplishment, and I would encourage us as well, if within the 5-year time frame, Peter Rogoff could walk in and say, hey, do you know where that station's going to go in Issaquah? And he's going to go, yeah, because we worked it out with you already. I know we're not even going to really begin doing early design for a while, but boy, we worked it out with you guys. I think that would be good for the community, especially because its impacts to potential redevelopment we're already engaged, and so better planning. So I think that's a good one to have in this time horizon, because Sound Transit hasn't been that way for others, and I've read about at least negative impacts because the jurisdictions didn't get out in front of that. So all of that is a way of saying, well, I haven't touched them all yet, have I? The 5, I love it, absolutely, positively, and I think it's linked to goals. It's actionable, it's measurable, you can communicate it, but I just hope that it results in very concrete items, and that, I'm talking about all those partnerships. So, in all, I'm in pretty, I guess I didn't mention, even though the 2 doesn't, in its name them, you have it subtitled Master Mobility Plan. Doesn't really the objective itself doesn't have it in there, but I think that kind of goes without saying in the way you describe it. So I guess I'm kind of thinking through this out loud for kind of the first time, and I'm there's nothing that jumps out to me that that as a big gap or as that might be out of line here. I'm feeling pretty comfortable with these objectives.
So one thought I had about the objectives is, we've got, it's plan, it's action, it's plan, which I have a feeling objective 4 is going to go away and get absorbed into the work plan, and then number 5 is not stuff on the ground. How I would be interested in an idea for bundling the plans and strategies into one objective. For a couple of reasons. One of them is just I think it might be perceived more positively if we're just planning, if we just got all this stuff that we're doing for 5 years, and then we have this little thing that's action. And then if we expand the objective 3, the action, to make it clear what we're going to do. Now, of course, we can't presuppose what the council might adopt in terms of capital projects, because we have to approve the budgets for those, and we have to probably look at our CIP again this year. But we could identify the I don't know if I'm going to say the right word, the different lists. What are those lists called? Whatever those lists are you're talking about. Identify where we're going to make a dent. And it's going to be, it would be projects within those lists of projects. For example, it would be new sidewalk connections, and so
maybe that action would be more something like build new sidewalk connections. Is that?
Yeah, build new sidewalk. Yes.
Call it out.
Just call it out. Make a list.
I really like the way that direction you took that. I like that idea of collapsing the planning into one. I think that without diluting much, it is a better presentation of the information. And maybe, I was thinking while you were talking still, but maybe on the action, maybe there is an action for pedestrian improvements. There is an action for more non-motorized improvements. And then there's a separate action for motorized improvements. And
I think
just to categorize them and raise the, that's just a suggestion, but then, and that was kind of was a little bit behind my question about what's in number 3. I think there's a lot there, but it's just 1 of 5. And so this kind of organization, if it is a new way of organizing and presenting accurately, it is more appealing. Thank you for that suggestion.
So what I kind of heard there is I didn't really hear anybody say the stuff that was in here wasn't okay.
That's an interesting
Question about light rail, but basically, but the way it came across is a lot of planning and not a lot of action. So maybe another way to present similar information would be to have an objective that was about planning and funding, or maybe planning and funding and partnerships. And then one about projects that was more specific about key priority top projects. And then open question about whether light rail should be called, a decision about light rail should be called out as a specific objective. That's kind of what I sort of feel like the conversation I just heard in the last 15 minutes.
Well, I think that if we were, and I agree, I like that direction. As I was reading through, I'm just trying to envision, we're here in the room talking about mobility and all the specific pieces, so it's really easy to kind of wrap your brain around that. But then as we start to look at everything together, if there is an area where we can collapse things down and have it more succinct, because there are a couple on here that I was thinking, well, could I move that just, up there so those are together? I think it would just in the end make things run a little more smoothly. With light rail, if we were talking about planning and funding, I mean, light rail is planning. So, I mean, maybe it's just one piece that we have listed there.
You guys talk a little bit about the importance of the light rail station planning and connectivity to other work.
For light rail, I mean, I think everyone understands that it impacts everything around it. we have a very general area of where we understand light rail is going to go, but we don't want to plan for a multi-use development to go in a specific area and then it get demolished in 20 years when light rail comes around. We want to be a lot more strategic around, and that's the idea that a lot of the action items under that objective came from, was making sure we're thinking about this comprehensively with land use, but as well with the modes, so that we're not just forcing everybody to drive to light rail, but they can use transit, or they can ride their bike and they'll walk to it and make it complete the full vision for the Central Issaquah area that the Central Issaquah Plan really calls for, and what the community is really asking for. And that was the whole drive behind all the actions under Objective 4, was making sure we're capturing the different kind of areas to make sure that the light rail is more successful than letting them, Sound Transit just kind of shove it down our throat.
I wanted to also add that from a timing perspective, what we've heard from Sound Transit is they might be ready to start engaging with us on this topic in, say, 2024. So we also thought it would be helpful for us to start having some community conversations and be ready to hit the ground running when they're also ready to engage, and maybe even cause them to engage with us a little earlier. If we can have that kind of shovel ready, I guess, footing, then perhaps we will get action earlier. The other point that I would make is that as we've talked about the criteria for what's appropriate to live in the strategic plan and what might not, and we've kind of wrestled with this, should be in the work plan, should be in the strategic plan. One of the things that I'm thinking about is I want our strategic plan to be attainable, but I also want it to have some element of big and bold too, right? We should go for some big goals. And I think that the strategic plan is the strategic plan for the organization, and it's helping us decide where to spend time and resources. And so for that reason, if we feel this is important, if we're not disagreeing about that, spending the time and energy to start thinking through these community conversations and deciding, then let's say that's what we're going to do. We're going to expend on that.
Can I just add? So I think the other piece, to maybe put a finer point on what Stephen was saying, is that there are a number of activities that are currently underway, such as the Gilman Boulevard planning and Central Issaquah, that rely heavily on understanding what the preferred location is for light rail. And it's both the light rail location as well as thinking about the corridor, and if we have to put in place protections, if, for example, it weren't to come straight down the middle of I-90 or needed to veer off in some location. So getting a better understanding of what that future direction looks like so that we can plan for that is, I think, one of the things that was identified.
So help me understand what happens with light rail planning if it comes off the strategic plan with the clear message to the administration that it's not, that we think that this is not important, and not that we don't understand all of that, but we've talked about there are a lot of things that are important. So what would the administration do if they still if you all still had that message, but it wasn't actually in this? Would we just abandon it, or?
No, we wouldn't, but it certainly would make it easier as we have council turnover within this 5-year plan to say, look, we've had this commitment and we are spending staff time on this. So it would be that consistency over the 5-year time frame. And I think it would just be less of a debate at moments in time when we have to talk about what we can take on in each year. We'd have the sliver that is allocated toward this task, and we wouldn't have to revisit it.
And if I can add, I think it also helps with the messaging with Sound Transit as well.
Yeah, and the public. Sorry, I meant to come back to that. Yeah, the messaging to them,
yeah, right.
Messaging to the public. Look, it's absolutely a priority of the city.
Facing side of
It lives somewhere.
So let me try a little.
Sorry, I was just going to talk about having things that are attainable, something that we can talk about, and that that would have impact. And the more I think about it, I would really like to see it stay. And I think about the corridor. I think about the station. I also think about being the end of the line and just being able to have. We can talk about it today, and I know that everybody has that top of mind, but I too am concerned about down the road and the work plans grow and then council turnover and that kind of thing. So for me, I would like to see it as part of the plan.
Let's take 5 minutes and just do a little exercise. And this is primarily a council ad hoc committee, but I think because of the nature of the topic, staff should probably advise anyway. Sometime in 2019, the city of Issaquah is going to adopt a strategic plan. And it's a 5-year strategic plan. So at some time in 2024, it's going to be 5 years from now. And imagine yourself in 2024. How old are you? How old are your kids? How old is your car? Or your bike, if you prefer. And somebody comes up and says, whatever happened? You spent all that time doing that strategic plan. What's different because you did that strategic plan? What do you want to be able to brag about 5 years from now? We did the strategic plan. Mobility was a major thing. What's different in 2024 because we did the strategic plan?
Well, we should be able to say that we achieved the goal.
Well, but what are you going to tell somebody at the grocery store? We achieved the goals, won't satisfy them. How's Issaquah better because he did this thing?
This goes back to my difficulty with what I was explaining to Emily earlier about how we use this elevator speech thing. I didn't really understand. So I understand now. Now you're using it for a different.
I'm trying to help you think through what should be the objectives because I'm trying to figure out what is it you're trying. I hear you saying action. Yeah. What are the actions you want to brag about 5 years from now?
So as you were talking and we were talking about light rail, I flipped over, went back to the analysis of what the community said, and the community said 28% and 16% of city employees said we want to mitigate traffic, and it's all about helping to solve traffic congestion. So while I hear everybody talking about the importance of having light rail integration in here, I don't see how that makes it into the plan, and I don't think I adopt a strategic plan because I'm trying to play nice with Sound Transit. We're going to do our work anyway. And so I want to be able to tell the community in 5 years the strides we made in solving traffic congestion, because that's what you told us you wanted us to work on.
Traffic congestion is better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, specifically in here it says that cited the problems of long commute times, a feeling of disconnectedness between neighborhoods, the slow decline of business on Front Street because of the current trend of congestion. And so I want to make sure that whatever we have under mobility in the plan addresses those issues. It doesn't mean that we can't deal with other things, but I think we need to be laser focused on what the community wants us to do.
So you want to say traffic is better 5 years from now?
Yeah.
What other things do you want to be able to brag about 5 years from now?
Well, I would say that I would love to be able to say traffic congestion is better and have specific examples. So to Stacy's point, I think it's the main thing that everyone wants to hear. Traffic congestion is better because we did these 5 things. And
if you have things on your mind, this would be a great time to say them.
Okay, but I'm not ready to say that right now, but I also would like to be able to say, in addition to that, so I'm building out a little bit, but I would also like to say that we've done great planning for our future. The light rail would fall
What
under
you
the
meant is
planning.
we've secured light rail in the right place.
Yeah, that it just takes a lot of planning as we're talking about making it easier for people to get around, that we have to have also a long range vision for that. Traffic congestion, we've worked on this and we have done these 5 things, but we haven't let our future planning slip through while we're doing that. So for me, I would like to have both of those. Light rail would be in my elevator pitch the example of it could be an example of future planning. I agree with you, Stacy. I think that it's definitely something we're going to work on and do as well. But I would just have that concern I talked about earlier about turnover and it sort of falling down to a lower priority.
It's a good conversation. You can. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to say first that a lot of the negative impacts, especially of regional traffic that we're experiencing here, you can say are a result of poor long-term planning by many jurisdictions, and so yeah. I mean, I think you said it very well, Mariah. That I'd love to be able to say the same kind of thing. You know, we did this, and this, and we really had a focus on avoiding and planning for and taking concrete steps to handle the increased growth that's coming here and in the region. And we're getting ahead of the planning for that.
So you want to brag about having clarity for how we're managing.
We want to manage growth, and so this is one way to make sure we do it.
And I'm not positive just with that second bullet up there. I think what I had talked about is that in the elevator pitch, I want to say that we have worked on traffic congestion in these ways, and that we have also had a focus on long-term planning. And I'm not sure that we need to get into the detail. Like the light rail would be an example, but I might have other examples as well. So I almost feel like we're kind of wrapping around the wheel on light rail.
So is this? I mean, is this the same? Is the point you're making now the same as Falls long-term?
30 and yes. So I almost feel like you can cross through number 2, because I think that for me, those are 2 things. Those are the 2 top things, and that light rail is just part of long-term planning.
Yep.
A question for staff. Going back to the point you made earlier, it's tough to know what currency it would give us to have something like 4 elevated to a strategic plan mobility objective. If you're sitting there thinking, I think that it would be great. We think that we could be more effective in what we're trying to achieve if we could point to the fact that look what the council did in terms of the visibility they gave this project. This is how important. This is just another measure how important this is to our project. Is there really any currency in that? Will that really make a difference?
I think it's
for what you're
helpful.
trying to do?
I do think it's helpful. We've tried to already cash part of that in. In fact, we had a conversation with Sound Transit officials, and we made reference to the point that it's showing up in the draft strategic plan, and that we absolutely intend to start work on that. And the currency in that moment was, eyes got bigger and said, okay, Issaquah's serious about this. I guess we're going to have to allocate some time and energy, Sound Transit, to being at the table, being part of discussions. I don't know how to quantify that. If it were to be removed, I think it would send maybe a different signal. But
Well, and I think in the context of other communities taking actions to cause pauses to the planning for other stations in the region also. This is a more proactive version.
All right, thank you. In our group, it was pretty unanimous. Sure. It was pretty unanimous that it's one of our objectives.
So, did we complete your 5-minute exercise?
5 minutes is probably fine. I was trying to help you. I was hearing this planning and funding projects and light rail maybe, and what I was hearing from the council members was that the way it was first presented seemed like a lot of planning and not very many specifics about what you were going to get done. And so I was trying to push back and say, okay, what is it you want to get done? So we get clarity on that. I heard. I feel like this is partly technical, partly it needs to get pitched back to staff to let them do what they're good at. But I would hear a pretty strong message here that they're actually taking actions to make traffic better in the next 5 years. Seems like that's a pretty clear and reasonable message. Clarity about long-range plans, that feels like it is embracing this planning and funding piece. And what I'm a little, I guess it's how to word this thing, because right now the action bullet just says we're going to figure out some actions and do them. And I'm hearing council wanting a little more clarity on sort of what it is.
I think I'd like a little more clarity on that as well. Are we referring to specific projects that we can point to, or the type of projects we can point to, or
was it more just at the level of we are going to complete a certain percentage of the pedestrian network, or still keep it a little higher level, but not so specific, saying we're going to do a multi-purpose trail on Front Street?
Well, when you were talking to us, you said that there were specific lists of projects that you were in the capital plan that you were referring to. And so, do those have names? Do those lists have names?
Two lists in particular, I would say. We have this long-term, bigger buck kind of thing. And then we have what we're calling the low-hanging fruit, which is smaller dollar amount, still not insignificant. And those tend to be for kind of classes of assets, so missing sidewalk portions, adding bike lane, adding ADA ramps, building a trail, things like that.
So what would your plan say? Let's get half of that stuff done, or 3/4 of that stuff done, and let's make the decisions on the longer term list and get 3 of those things funded.
So let me explain
here's an example.
let me explain the difficulty that one of the difficulties that we have. That list is just the list that staff has come up with, in part because we have gotten input from a few elected officials, a few community members, but they aren't the low-hanging fruit doesn't show up on the capital plan as distinct items, and so it hasn't been through that public process nor the council process. So calling attention to specific ones on that list would be difficult because we haven't heard that those are the priority items, nor have we heard that a particular class of asset investment is the priority. You haven't told us, we want you to enhance what you're doing and build out the sidewalk network. Right, we haven't heard that because we also would tell you that's in lieu of doing some other things, right? Or perhaps pushes out those longer term, bigger projects just by taking a dime out at a time. So we haven't had those conversations, and that's why it gets really, really tough. We could right now, we could write in the plan, as Stephen said, something like complete an additional, 15% of the sidewalk missing gap kind of inventory, right? We could do that because we have that list as well. But our hesitancy was, is that your priority? Is that the community's priority, given that it will be a trade-off on other asset categories or projects?
Like
building out the bike network or the ADA program or anything.
And these will all be topics that'll be addressed, I think, in the mobility master plan.
The mobility master plan, you want to talk about how it's going to help us with prioritization and inventory?
Yeah, so the strategic plan in particular is kind of giving us a starting point for the mobility master plan. But the mobility master plan is really going to talk about what the missing gaps are and how to prioritize that, just as you were kind of getting to. But at the same time, the discussion for that's going to be huge, because it could be safety improvements, connections to schools, it could be connections to parks, it could be there's going to be a really long list that we're going to be discussing in the master plan that we just don't have time for now, which is why we're trying to keep this a little more broad so that we can discuss that more in the mobility master plan, and that's where that bigger discussion prioritization kind of comes.
So is that why you referred to 3 as low-hanging fruit? It's kind of like the mobility has a certain, the eyes are raised to a certain level, and we're looking at things in the mobility master plan. And yet we believe there are these other things that we can do now. We figure out how to fund them. We have to vet it. But we think there's opportunity there. It's kind of at a different level.
Right, because we recognize there is a lot of planning kind of embedded in all of this. And we didn't want to just seem like we're just doing planning. We wanted to be actually doing actions. And that's where the low-hanging fruit is. It's items that aren't necessarily identified in existing programs or work plans, but have been highlighted as priorities by council members or community members or anyone else who's kind of given us input. And so even without that prioritization, we still want that vetting process, but we still want to do something in those 5 years too.
So how long is it going to take to do the mobility master plan?
This year.
It's going to take a full year.
It's 1 year.
And so
Strategic plan.
is it, go ahead.
I'm beginning to think that funding at its own level, it is the other side of the coin of the projects, right? They go glove in hand. Let me tell you, the major projects that we prioritize are going to be part of the same conversation about how do we fund what we want to do, what do we want to do, how do we fund it? I mean, those are tightly coupled. And so I'm hearing that by your action number 3, there is a kind of a class of project that has certain characteristics, but it's not the rebuild of Newport Way all the way from 54th across 900, down to Sunset. Right. That's in this, and as one example of one of from 900 or from Maple to Sunset. I mean, that's a $50 million project. Okay, that's not in your action plan. We know that. Funding for that, I don't know if that one's going to be on the list or not, but it seems to me that in 5 years from now, it was like, we did a lot of high impact, low cost things. We did this, that, and the other one. We debated, we prioritized, we picked our top projects, we got funding arranged for that. We're doing this, we've done that, we're going to do the other one. There's a plan. We can see our way through these major projects. And then on a broader, longer term scale, we completed and here's what we did about the long term planning. We did this mobility plan, and we had to work regionally. Mary Lou was sitting back there, and I know it's and we did that now fills in some really nice big spaces for me. There's these big projects and the funding for them. We did this other things that maybe, like flashing yellow arrows and target roundabouts type stuff. And we're at the same time, we're taking care of the future as well. And here's the planning that we did. And oh, by the way, and the only reason for me, I'm all for it. Optics are involved with this. And I would say, I would defer, if you guys feel strongly that that the optics of having this light rail location at this level is advantageous for us in achieving our goals, put it in there. I'm fine with keeping it at an objective level. If you feel strongly, I have to defer to you. I can understand why, for influence reasons, there could be an advantage, and if you think it is, then I would support that.
I'm going to pose a question too, because one of the things we have talked about, Stacy brought this up in particular, is community feedback. whether we've heard it through strategic plan or ad nauseum, every other time we have asked for input, there's a desire for us to be focused on mitigating congestion, right? It's back to this question of what does easier probably look like. I think that's a piece that people are reflecting on. I hear you. We've had this debate too. Staff don't necessarily we don't have those words in here. We don't call out an action. I think the intent is that they're embedded within some of those other actions, like looking at short-term and long-term capital projects, that perhaps some of those projects have that objective. But I want to ask the question, is there a particular action that you have in mind that you want us to list in the plan?
No, because I don't have the options in front of me.
So, and I would say I'm not sure that we do either, because of the complexity of the problem.
Well, we have.
So that's why you hear language about planning and evaluating and things like that, because I don't know. We have not had.
That we have a list of like sidewalk connections that need to be made.
I'm talking vehicle congestion. That is what I hear is a focus the community wants us to have.
But if the goal is to getting around town is easier for people who live, work, and play here, getting around encompasses more than just.
So that's what I'm testing.
Yep.
Are we cool with that? Not having a focus on mitigating vehicle congestion.
So I think so that's a conversation to have if we have the right goal statement. And because what the goal statement says is that we are going to get around town easier in 5 years.
Yeah, and then as part of my question, I'm saying if I make it easier for you on bike, walking, but not car.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things we're going to try to play out in the MMP is we're going to try to have that kind of community conversation because we won't be able to do it all, and we're going to have to prioritize probably some modes and means and certainly projects. Yeah.
So I thought we had who mentioned flashing yellow arrows? Okay. But I thought there was, somebody mentioned other small scale, big impact projects.
And I would say most of those don't have much to do with mitigating congestion. There's probably a few, but most of them don't.
Correct.
So are we saying we're not going to be able to do anything to mitigate congestion and make it easier in 5 years?
Saying from some modes maybe, others be a lot tougher.
I think it depends on how we want to measure it.
Yes.
The performance of a portion of a corridor can improve dramatically with one project. And that won't benefit everybody, but it's not, there is no one, we know there's not one thing you can do to do it all. So I think it should be, because I think that's what we do.
Could you do one project every year that did something in some intersection?
Well, before I go there, we're currently in the process of going through kind of vetting and what we have the unfunded portion of our capital plan, and we're going through the process right now, and especially focusing on the transportation components of that, transportation infrastructure. So this is happening right now, and we'll probably get there by the time around the same time this will end. We'll complete the strategic plan as well. That timing should be. I don't know. Maybe that other part will happen before this happens. I think there's some. It's not like we can strike something today, and it may not have specific projects in it.
Right.
But we're working toward them, and 12 months from now we can say this is where they are.
We agree.
And
We
then
think
24,
in a
look
year
where we
we
are.
can
And
be
5
more
years from now, I
specific.
say, you know what?
Yeah.
We said we were going to make a big deal out of it,
Yeah.
and this is what we've done. I still have a happy story to tell 5 years from now.
We agree. We think we're going to have some great stuff out of the
Okay.
MMP and the ad hoc conversations and the council CIP deliberations, and we're going to be able to be a lot more specific. It's just
So
hard right now.
I feel sort of clarity about one objective is about planning and funding for major long-term projects, which is kind of bundling two of the way the staff promoted it, but I don't think there's a difference in intent there. I think you're all acknowledging that's important. I hear completion of some short-term opportunity projects within the timeframe of the plan. I hear acquiescence unless Stacy wants to push on it, that maybe if staff thinks that light rail should be elevated as a thing that's important, getting that decision right would be okay. What I'm wondering about, is there another objective that just was bandied around the last couple minutes, that's something about get something done about traffic mitigation within this 5 years? And it might even be, you can't say it's fixed this intersection, but it's fixed something once the plan's done, the mobility plan. I don't know. You want to take that sort of bold step that.
Sorry,
No, go ahead.
Well, I think that one piece that I guess I keep going back to some of the work in terms of the regional traffic, and I don't, if we're talking about traffic congestion getting better and different modes, I think that if we don't have goals that are built around, and I'm all for if we're helping in different modes, but I don't think we can leave the cars to the side. I think that we have, to me, that we have to concentrate on that, and my brain keeps going back to what we should be doing with some of the regional traffic work.
So if we were to have something that was focused on vehicular mobility, ease of that, perhaps we could write it in a way that's attached to regional efforts? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I see it as one, I guess I see it as one piece of it. But when we talk about elevator speeches and talking with the community, and when they're talking about traffic, to me, they're pretty much talking about one mode. And they're talking about their cars, and they're talking about being able to get across town and not being able to get across town.
Just need to
And
close our
Yeah.
viaducts, that's all. That's all it takes, I guess.
I mean, on the other side of things, if we're improving mobility in other ways, I love that, but I'm just trying to kind of laser focus on what I hear and what I see that people would want me to be talking about. That we came up with these projects, and here's the 5, and we think that this is going to have an impact for this reason, and we're doing this long-term planning. So.
So, this is a total sidebar, so you can just process this and then put it away. And one of the things that we have talked about is there were, I'm not sure I can rattle them off, let's say 2 top projects that were on the Transportation Task Force list. One of them we took care of, the Trader Joe's Maple Roundabout. The other we didn't, because it's huge, is an additional under-overcrossing. That is the one thing that shows up, right, on all of our traffic modeling that has any significant impact, any, on local mobility.
But that's not within 5 years.
Maybe. So here's where I'm going with that one. We think there's a way to start planning for that in connection with Sound Transit and light rail. You love that even more now, don't you? But
But wait, there's
we
more.
could emphasize that that's where we're gonna try to go for that. We want to make local mobility better. We know from the modeling that will help, and so maybe we say that is the thing we're really going to work on. We're going to work on identifying possible funding. We're going to work on possible location considerations. We're going to think about integration with Sound Transit, with Gilman Corridor redesign. It's on the other side of low-hanging fruit.
You know, like, we are fooling ourselves if okay, maybe I don't mean to say it that strong, but I'll repeat. I said something earlier. A lot of the problems we do have is because of the lack of foresight and planning. And by God, our strategic plan better have the right amount of that advanced long-term planning in there, or we're just going to be insane because we keep doing the same thing. So there's no doubt in my mind there. Brian, I disagree with the way, one point that you made, you tried to summarize things a moment ago. You added funding, planning, and you said funding and long-term planning. But I think funding actually applies to things that happen inside the 5-year window as well. So that's the only place that you put it. I think so that was you. The way you said it, you kind of took funding out of something we're going to do near term. No.
Good point. That wasn't happening in my head.
Okay, all right.
What I wrote up here was.
All right. So you know what? There are, again, there is low-hanging fruit. We think there's some critical projects that we that want to do, and we're gonna decide what those are and figure out how to fund them in the near term. And there's a lot of other projects too, and we're going to continue to do what's right to make sure those become reality as well. That's the planning. That's the partnership. So I just keep coming back to those three objective categories.
And also just kind of timing-wise, as a reminder that as the MMP discovers certain things, maybe something rises to the top. That doesn't mean that this plan is set in stone. It can be adjusted down the line.
What if we changed the strategy a little bit on the action objective, and we don't compel ourselves to name specific projects in the strategic plan, but what if we bind ourselves in the strategic plan to identifying projects that we can complete within 5 years? And I think that would have to have some more words than that, and would probably have to have some more steps. But that gives us some latitude to do some decision making about. But we know we are going to accomplish something, but we're not going to come up with it on January 24th.
Projects we can fund and build. That's what I'm
Yes.
hearing.
Yep.
What I was thinking as I was trying to think this was just exactly that.
Oh, sure, Brian. I'm just kidding.
What I was thinking is that there were three, and I think these are the same thing that all just said. It's like it was planning and funding for major long-term projects. That there was completing short-term opportunity projects, which you could be fund and complete, or fund and build. That would be another way to say it, but I didn't mean to imply the funding one there. And then something about the light rail decision supports Issaquah's mobility goals, and maybe that gets reworded so it clearly could include that. I like that you hadn't said that when I wrote that up there, but maybe that there's a way that that's clearly part of that. And then it seemed to me, just like you said, it seemed to me that the language under this, whether it's action items or just the description of this, says, that there are a variety of projects that can be funded and completed in the next year, such as, and then a list of 6 or 8 of the kind of things that are there, and not actually identifying that at this corner we're going to do this crosswalk, but we have these kind of things and we commit that we're going to get some of them done in this year. And we'll have to get that right, but does that?
I still would rule the light rail if there are, if it's still going to show up in the plan, whether or not that gets supported or not, I would suggest rolling it up into the planning and funding, and then go through all of the action steps that are in here for planning and funding. And I think some of them we can be eliminated. We can be a little more vague about what has to happen.
It felt to me like the conversation was going toward, it was good politics to elevate the light rail into the level of a standalone kind of focused objective. Can you live with that?
I don't think they're going to look at our plan and go, oh no, it's wrapped up into long-term planning, that's bad. I just don't think that they're going to care. But anyway, there's no reason to fight about it tonight.
Yeah, I would, for me, when I look at that, I think about planning, then I think about funding in the long-term projects. So from an elevator pitch, being able to say, these are the 1 or 2 projects we can complete and build, and that's our goal, to have that done.
Oh, I see, because it says and funding.
Yeah, and then here's our, however we decide to word the short-term projects, maybe they're not called out, but we have short-term projects that and maybe we do, you had said earlier, like maybe 1 in each corridor, I don't know. I would have to think about that, but that we've got language around that. So I would see planning and light rail underneath that, and then I don't know where to put the word funding, but the major long-term projects, boom, boom, and then some nice language that talks about short-term opportunity projects that we intend to roll out.
I don't know why we need funding in there, whether or not we roll light rail under it or not. I just think planning for major long-term projects includes funding strategies. I'm looking to shorten words.
We kind of have like the big projects and then the shorter term.
We have like 10 minutes, is that right?
Yeah.
Do we want to talk a little bit about performance measures in this group?
Would this last one be better, like something like achieve a major mobility decision to include light rail and traffic congestion improvement? Or something that's probably not the best set of words I ever wrote, but trying to get there, that you're trying to make a major move that includes light rail serving regional mobility and also does what your citizens are asking for in trying to like this, something that actually could move the needle on local traffic. Trying to, and just recognize that it's a big, bold decision that's kind of bigger than all the other stuff that's on this longer term list.
The only problem with that is Emily told us to park it after she mentioned it. She said it was a sidetrack.
Well, yes, the under overcrossing.
I just didn't know that was 5 years, so now I want to talk more about it.
Well,
So-
all I'm saying is it is more ambitious of an action item than perhaps what lives in the plan right now, and it's very specific. It's project specific. So if that isn't what council wishes to do,
Well, we want to talk
and
more about that
the
because
attainability really is super unknown. Right? It
It's what?
definitely won't land on the list of the projects Stacy wants to kind of identify as being capable of being funded and constructed in 5 years.
So that's where that's why I was trying to say it's a big decision. You want to, within 5 years, you want to figure out how the light rail is going to work and figure out how to do and fund a major move that's going to help local traffic. And you won't get it built in 5 years, but you'd basically, the audacious goal is that you're going to have the decision made, the funding in place, Sound Transit will have bought off on this scheme, and it all comes together.
I don't know about the funding in place, but
Yeah.
But it's the goal, right? I mean, you might not pick it all up, but you'd want to. Why wouldn't you say that within 5 years you'd have that stuff figured out?
So figured
I
out.
just don't think big
select
job
projects
projects happen that way. I mean, I think there's a real vision that's painted, and there's a lot of players and stakeholders that have to come on board on this, and then who knows what the Fed and the state would really want to do, and that will dramatically affect what happens funding wise. So I think there's a major step you get there before the funding is lined up.
So the wording is important, but it seems to me that the objective you're trying to get here is you're putting out there your big audacious goal that says we want to make this happen, and you don't want to say it in a way that's going to annoy somebody that you need funding from.
Yeah.
But you still want to say we're there for you.
Yeah, you said
if you are.
make a decision. You're right. The way you say that, kind of make a decision. I do want it. I haven't given up. The IJR, my interpretation still, even with that presentation that we got, is that, a final decision hasn't been made. And I've said this before, we should be frickin' lobbying those people as well. And I asked for hey, what's our own engineer's assessment of the data that scored it this way? I mean, I'm not giving up on that. And I don't know if that would be a strategy independent what you have in your mind. But, so that's why I think that it feels premature to link them so tightly, or not, maybe would be, if we feel we're going to address it, we shouldn't link them so tightly.
Yeah, we haven't even had a conversation about it.
Yeah.
No, the only conversation we had was with the traffic bond, where everybody basically said, yeah, we really want that, but yeah, we get that at that time it was $75 million, and that was going to be, the whole transportation package, and felt that was not what we wanted to do at that moment. Just pick one project.
Are we driving to something conclusive, or can we move on? Because there's
a
lot for people to ingest and digest and regurgitate.
As we did, yes, last group, I feel like we have enough to go and do some work, and we can refine and bring back a proposal on what we
To the same
think.
group or to the whole?
To the whole.
Okay.
I'm testing that, so you guys can tell me. Other option is we can come back a second time and have another touch here. You have that option.
Mariah, Growth and Development is going to meet again for an hour and a half because we
Oh, I see.
did a lot.
So I'll ask that question here in about 7 minutes. Do you want to meet again or not? But I would say even if we can have 5 minutes of conversation about performance measures, that would be super helpful to us too.
You scroll back to, I think you've got a slide of performance measures.
Yep, that's the first one. Back the other way.
Back?
Yeah, they're
that's one of
back.
the first ones.
Okay. You guys want to?
Yes. So the main thing to know with the four performance measures, there's kind of a grouping of performance measures, really. With mode split, we're really looking at how much of each mode everyone's going to use. So we'll be looking at transit, we'll be looking at pedestrian, we'll be looking at bike, everything individually, and setting goals for that. What do we want that split to actually look like in the future, and how do we want it to change or improve in certain ways? System connectivity is that filling the gaps, identifying where there are gaps and how to fill bike network, the sidewalk network, any safe routes to school improvements that need to be happening. That's primarily what that performance measure. System access is all about the connection with land use, and so making that connection,
Interference again.
having people. Looking at housing and connections to transit and also the non-motorized network. And then the community satisfaction, this came into play primarily because of the goal itself of we can't tell the community what's easier. They really have to tell us what's easier, and that's what's really behind the community satisfaction part of the performance measures.
Okay. In general, about measures, unless we have an existing baseline, we don't really know what success will look like. And sometimes success is just movement of the second measure compared to the first measure.
Right.
And whether the first measure was good, bad, or something else, we don't know. But a measure of success is, did it move in the right direction? So I heard you say, this mode split. And what levels do we want those to be? I would caution us against setting arbitrary, percentage, or like specific percentages. I think we have to measure if we don't have it already. If you tell me we have some good data right now, that would, and we can do some analysis and say we think we can achieve that, then I think we'd have a conversation about measures that are specific targets. Lacking that, we have to take some measures, figure out where we are, and then continue to measure. That's just one of the problems with selecting measures. It's really easy to arbitrarily. Well, I think that would be a good number, and there's no chance you can have success at that. Well, then you shouldn't have checked that number. There's different ways. So you're nodding your head. You seem to understand what I'm talking about.
No, I completely understand, and I agree with you that with a lot of this, one of the objectives for the performance measure is make sure it was realistic for us to do, but also maintain over time. And all this is actually within existing systems and programs that we have that we're able to have this data.
Okay.
Office of Sustainability has already calculated mode, share, split within their programs. And so that's something that we already have, and we have that baseline data. The one that we probably don't have the baseline data is the system connectivity. Where do we actually have the gaps? And some of that is filled with some of the different modes, but not all the modes are completed. So that's where we're really trying to fill that foundation.
And so some measures are just snapshots of what they are and what you've accomplished. And a lot of times you hear, well, what does success look like? Well, getting one done is successful. But, and I don't want to belittle that, and so I think we want to be, as we go into this and you say system connectivity, you will do at some point you'll have some type of inventory. Say, here's all the missing connectivity pieces of all the different mode types that we want. And then we're going to, based upon reasonable things, we're going to identify what we think we can accomplish in this time frame. Okay, now you've set a goal for you, and let's measure our progress against that goal. I think they progress like that.
And two parts of it there. One is what is the performance measure? What are you going to measure?
That's right.
And then the other part of it is what's the target? Right?
Well,
and until you have a baseline and you have some sense of what's going on, you don't know where to put the target. Right?
Well, and sometimes I'm saying the point is that even targets, your target can be to improve year over year. Right? It's not get to 10%. It's like, oh, we just found out we were a 5. My goal is to improve. Right, and you can, but you can't. You don't want to set those too early.
No, exactly. But figuring out what you're going to measure and establishing the baseline is the first step.
So when you presented these, I heard a lot of these. It'd be good to see. At a very high level, I think, and the way you presented that, thank you. I will never forget your point. What's the goal of the goal? And we would be making investments. How are people getting around? Because if you say I want to make it easier to get across town, when I'm in traffic, I want traffic to be better. I'm saying, listen, if you're in traffic, you are traffic. And one of the things that's going to make a difference is more people choose non-motorized ways to get across town, or some other way to get things done. So my sense was, I heard a lot of potential in everything that you said about all of those. Those are all very measurable. Mode split would tell us if we're truly getting people out of their cars. Connectivity would tell us if we've created more opportunity to get to the regional hubs, or that system access, for example. And I like the way you said it at the end as well.
I'm not sure how identifying a mode share split and figuring out how those numbers change over the next 5 years tells us anything about how we've made it easier for people to get around town. And maybe that's just because I don't work in the transportation field. I don't understand that but anyway, I guess I see that we've got a lot of examples in here about how you measure your performance. And I don't know that it's rocket science for most of these. So for the plans, we've either done them or we haven't. And for the actual projects, we either did them or we didn't. And depending on what those projects were, if it's that we're going to, make more sidewalk connections, then we identify how much we're going to do, and then whether we did it or not. Now, the bigger question is on those is, does that actually tackle the goal that we identified? And so I'm still thinking about that, because it's bothering me a little bit that that I don't know, that maybe we haven't identified the right goal, the words, but I'll just leave it for that.
And I'll just say, the intention is to report out on the strategic plan. So that all those outputs in terms of, okay, got project 1 and 3 done, or did these certain things, that part is still absolutely going to happen. These are more to articulate whether or not we're making progress on the goal overall. So by accomplishing all those things, did the end result be that the community is more satisfied with
that one I get.
Get around?
That one I get.
Are we seeing changes in mode split? So those are kind of higher level, are all the different actions that we're taking actually having an impact overall? Is the outcome, is there an actual outcome?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that other than the community satisfaction survey, I'm not sure that 1 through 3 help us,
So if I can chime, the way staff kind of sees it, number 4 is really answering that question of how do we measure the goal itself. 1, 2, and 3 are actually more tools for staff to help us adjust, to get meat behind why 94% decrease to 93% dissatisfaction on traffic, and looking at, well, transit use went up this year, or people actually biked less this year. So we can look behind it and make adjustments with how we do things and how we can better achieve the goal, rather than saying 1, 2, and 3 actually directly are measuring the goal.
And do they belong up there? Do they belong under performance measures if they're really tools that staff uses behind the scenes? I don't know. And we don't have to have a lengthy conversation.
Yeah, and there are different levels of performance measures, and one of your questions, I think we're trying to identify what we think are going to help us be the indicators. As we report out to community and we're telling the story, we're going to probably pick and choose which of these measures seem to be more at the outcome level and are roll up. So they may take a bunch of those management level measures and then be combined and be a different measure altogether. So that's a different question at a different time. Is what does that report out to community look like?
Yeah. So I guess I would just have to see it. I just wouldn't. I could just envision having a conversation in 5 years about how, no, we need a different mode share split. Well, why? I don't know. It's just wonky to me, but that's because I don't work in the field.
I can see now that we've had the chance to talk it through, because my first comment was really that, what's really the piece that the community is going to want to see and what they want to measure is it easier for me to get around. So number 4 makes really good sense. And the others, I think that it's important to have the baseline and gather the data, and I think that it will come in later, but I think number 4 just, really rises to the top in terms of looking at what and how we're measuring, but maybe those other pieces come into play even as part of that.
Yeah, we kind of looked at it as we want to be able to tell the story. We didn't want to just say a certain percentage of the community is dissatisfied with transit access. We just wanted to have data behind, well, this is the progress we've been making towards it. It's not going to be something we can achieve right away. It's going to be kind of a slow progress to make changes towards the different modes, but even looking at traffic congestion.
But within
so
those
we're way
surveys,
over
if
time.
major
Yep.
things are built out, and
So let me pose the question then. Do you want to meet again and see subsequent draft of this material in advance of seeing it with all your colleagues at the work session?
If there's a third option, which is getting in advance but not meeting,
And being able to provide some feedback?
and committing to providing that feedback.
Okay. Thoughts? Option 1, 2, or 3?
I don't feel like we need to meet again.
I don't feel like we need to meet
Okay, then we will strive to get something in order to have a little bit of time to maybe incorporate any subsequent feedback. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you very much.
Measures,
Right, we're gonna.
Chris is running late. He went to the wrong place.
Oh, he's running late. Okay, we'll take 5.
City Hall.
Okay.
Honestly,
All right.